Oh, hello. It has been a very long time since I have done a live video. My name is Cindy. I'm in the Corporation of Victoria. Surprise, surprise. Today is the Friday, the 6th of November 2025. It's been about a year and a half, I think, since my last video, and prior to that, probably a year before that too. Why am I doing it? Back by popular demand. Yes, it's true. A few people have said, hey, Cindy, make a video before you go. And, well, but that's not really the reason. The reason is I've got this in my hands. I finally got a copy because a very nice good friend decided to reach out and say, hey Cindy, I've got a spare copy, would you like it? And he was friends with Niki in real life, Niki Raapana that is, who wrote 2020 Our Common Destiny, and the first printing was in 2006. Now I had printed a PDF and had been meaning to read it. And there's no really good excuse besides the fact that I can't read. No, I don't like reading loose leaf pieces of paper. I prefer the medium of a book, and since it arrived, I started reading it. I'm actually not that far into it. I'm only 30 pages in, but feel the need to share it. I know a lot of people prefer the audio version. I know that they listen to Audible, and I know a lot of people haven't got it in their hands, or maybe they've printed the PDF and can't bring themselves to read it. So I'm going to read it to you because it's so worthwhile. Niki was truly, truly so ahead of her time. And reading through even just the first 30 pages, I understand why there's been such an excellent oppression of communitarianism and getting the word out about it, like how much suppression I've had from Facebook, and how many Marxists have climbed out of their holes and from out under the wood each time I mention it, coming on to derail posts, put me in my place, explain the Hegelian dialectic because apparently, they're the experts. I think you'll find it very interesting if you enjoy long format. I'm not going to entertain you. I'm going to read to you. And so without... I'll just give... I suppose my own preamble is that I grew up working class and am still squarely in working class. So just in case you think I come from the upper echelons or come from money and it's easy for me to speak to, capitalism is the way or something like that. No. What I fight for is having my freedom, my personal freedom. And I understand that if we don't all have personal, individual freedoms, as in those, whether you believe in God or not, is almost irrelevant to having divine rights, because they come from someone outside of man. Because when men get involved, and we call it humanism, who determine morality and law, we end up in a bind. And as you'll see, it well elucidated in Niki's book. So it's not very long, and I will power through it. Okay. Introduction. What plan? The year is 2008. Humanity is entering the long-awaited era of open borders, free trade, peace and justice. Our leaders have convinced us that our planet is suffering from eons of irresponsible human use. The results of celebrating unfettered individual freedom is inequality, social injustice, war, disease, global warming, and inhumane treatment of animals. I will try not to interject, but I find it very difficult to read a sentence like that and go, yeah, like nail on the head, bullseye, bullseye, bullseye. After years of careful preparations and agreements between elite powers, it is agreed that every individual on the planet must be subordinated to the global community. The common good will forever replace the outdated and destructive notion of individual rights. The blueprint for a central government authority was handed out to the United Nations in 1992. It established the bureaucratic structure for a global economic and political system. Revised Local Agenda 21 plans are underway in every UN member nation, directing all people, land, business, commerce, industry, agriculture, and education. The goal is to create a more sustainable world culture. At first, these plans for a sustainable community seem practical, benign, honourable, and fair. They are described as community visions, which naturally arise out of local interests. They promise to protect the future needs of the community from selfish, materialistic consumers abusing the planet today. Most people never know their community has a plan. There are advertisements inviting everyone to help write the vision of their community, but most can't be bothered with what goes on at neighbourhood meetings. I will say here that in Australia we have the have your say version of writing a vision for the community. If they do go, they will not be told the plan has already been written, and they will never be told their participation is just for show. We call it the Delphi technique. Regardless of genuine local input at planning meetings, the resulting legal plan always follows standards for sustainable development. Once adopted into law, everyone is expected to agree with the supranational government's right to control private land, private life, and the economy. Anyone who doesn't agree with the vision is considered a wacko or worse. Nordic and I were living in Seattle when we first became aware of any sort of plan. We started asking public officials what was going on with the transit routes and the big red X's on our houses. The planners were rewriting mission statements and designing the city around transit-oriented pedestrian corridors. Julianne Romanello has done a lot of work on TOD, which is transit-oriented development. Developing property they didn't even own. Enforcement agencies were testing innovative policing strategies in our neighbourhoods. When we asked for definitions of terms and copies of manuals used in police training programs, officials for the city of Seattle were evasive and implied we were paranoids causing problems. Raised on sticks and stones, the more they ridiculed us as tinfoil hats, the more we read and learned. It turned into a family project, and our neighbours and roommates became involved as well. For a long time, we stuck to personal interviews and government document research. We spent months begging for answers that never came. We even stuck our nose in Black's Law Dictionary trying to figure out their terminology. After we found the Washington State Public Disclosure Act in January 2000, we began following the legal protocol for requesting reviews of government documents. Suddenly, they began answering our requests. What we learned was almost unbearable. They had no definitions for the new terms they were using to justify access into private homes. We couldn't believe they were so blatant in their plans to rebuild the entire city and then control everyone in it. So we reminded the planners and the police of their sworn constitutional obligations to us. We reminded the police of that little part in the Fourth Amendment about obtaining legal search warrants. They all reacted with astonishment. "Oh no," they said, "your rights have been balanced. Don't you know? It's a livability issue. America has evolved. It took us a while to figure out where their language came from. Community at large, quality of life. Think about your own city and the quality of life, statistics and shit that comes up all the time. Livability, Melbourne, most livable city. Balanced, evolved. The next year we learned the idea that our system needs balancing is a social science coming out of Washington, D.C. And for anyone that might be listening in Europe or the UK, Australia or Canada, who thinks that this book is about the United States, it certainly isn't. We had never heard of Amitai Etzioni, whose real name is Werner Volk, or his Communitarian network, but his books seem to be sacred texts for every Seattle government agency we visited. It appeared all the high-level partners were already familiar with Etzioni, but not one of them could bother to tell us where they found their need for a plan to rebuild the entire city. We began asking around if anyone outside of Seattle planning had heard about the plan for our future. Everyone had the same reaction. What plan? Discovering the answer to that question is like falling down the rabbit hole and finding yourself prostrate at the feet of the Queen of Hearts. Unlike Alice, this is not a story or a dream, and you can't wake up. There is no matrix to unplug from. So if our people are already slaves, what motivated us to expose the slave traders? What good can it do? Well, in the first place, we may be commoners, but we were raised to believe we were free, regardless of our social status. My journalism classes were all based on the whole idea of a free press. It literally blew me away to find out that is a lie. In the beginning, I attempted to show my neighbours and friends the plan, but there was way too much for them to read. Nobody was willing to read long, vague communitarian planning documents written in a new language, and my long, detailed, heavily referenced articles about the theory were like Greek to my people. There's no easy introduction to the topic for beginners. The purpose of this book is to help you bypass the information blackout so you can learn about the plan without spending years wading through obscure political doctrine like we did. It's still not going to be an easy read though, because none of us were ever supposed to know any of this. The material in 2020 is factual and verifiable. Just a reminder, it was written or published for the first time in 2006. You won't find any conspiracy theory in here, but you will find current events, history, and probably a lot more than you bargained for. There are very few schools in the United States that will teach communitarianism as the synthesis in the Hegelian dialectic. What they teach, even in high-level classes, is so watered down you'd never know what Hegel said freedom really meant. To Hegel, slavery to the state is freedom. The history of the world, and especially the United States, has been carefully edited to keep us in the dark about our own heritage. Today, schools ignore or play down one most important fact. Following the American Revolution, almost every colony in the world declared their inalienable right to protect their markets from thieves, royal-born or not. Over 200 years later, communitarians identify protected markets as a barrier to achieving spiritual and economic perfection. All must forfeit their prosperity and self-reliance to the needs of the community. Amitai Etzioni has a following as though he is a revered yogi, but he is not a guru. He is a social scientist whose mission is to reinvent our world using socio-economic theories and proven methods for changing human behavior. I'll note there that it's called behavioral economics if you want to do research and stuff on, nudge units. Other social scientists, you may recognize their names. Weishaupt, Plato, Hegel, Marx, Blavatsky, Bailey, Lenin, Trotsky, Buber, Pol Pot, Mao, Castro, etc., long envisioned a time when all the people in the world would be taught to coexist in a civil society. Civil society was introduced to the world by the same people who brought France the guillotine in the 18th century. Visionaries like these have shown the world exactly how they teach their principles of peace. Just in the last couple of centuries, billions of innocent people have been sacrificed, enslaved, tortured, terrorized, robbed, raped, and murdered to build this perfect vision of a world without borders. Etzioni has been designing communitarian programs to re-educate Americans for 30 years. His teachings have tricked entire generations into believing that our government is selfish and immoral, so we will change our way of thinking. In order to be happy in our new world, we must somehow forget our silly and selfish notions of privacy, property, and self-determination. They no longer apply. The government, military, and most of the people in the United States have been successfully communitarianized. The peacekeeping missions in Iraq and Afghanistan are examples of how reluctant nations are rebuilt for regional integration. My father, Fred Friedrich, was a self-educated military man who studied war history all of his life. He hated communism and was a loyal supporter of all US wars against it. We spent many evenings discussing the news and politics back in the 70s. A former 82nd Airborne paratrooper who retired Sergeant Major, my dad's devotion to the US Constitution was unwavering. I thought sure he would help me once I realized their goal was to demolish our constitutions. But he was totally confused by my early articles referencing Hegel, and I can't say I blame him. He struggled through my initial tirades, but eventually he became angry at me for bringing them to him, insinuating I was purposefully trying to make him look stupid. On Christmas 2002, Nordica and I were forbidden to discuss politics at his house. It was in this painful way that we learned the true power of dialectic exerts over our lives. Dad refused to consider the possibility that this whole system exists because A, he'd never heard of it, and B, now that he had, he couldn't understand it. The dialectical division of Americans into capitalists versus collectivists was so successful, he actually thought we were repeating socialist rhetoric to him. Dad was also a big fan of the Israelis. He taught me to believe their hitman teams were heroes. I had no reason to question him, so I always cheered for the Mossad and cried during every Holocaust movie I ever saw. When our research expanded to include the history of the Israeli and Russian revolutions, my patriotic father stopped talking to me. I take some solace in that because he died before he died, he wrote in a letter to my older sister that he had decided I may have been on to something big. We are sorry that he didn't live to see this book. We sincerely regret having offended the people we love by identifying belief systems used to further the vision. It was not our intention to alienate family and friends by informing them they had been tricked. But we are glad we decided not to shy away from our evidence just because it made everyone uncomfortable. I was trained in college to be an objective journalist, to get every side to the story and not censor anything. So the automatic reaction I felt to certain words began to make me suspicious. I realized our rejection of taboo topics is a result of lifelong conditioning. Like my dad, I was blinded by faith so strong that for years I denied many horrible, obvious truths. With Nordica's unwavering support and Nancy Rising pushing me to find who's at the top, I kept a steady course that took me down some rough roads. While I insisted I wasn't going past the state and federal levels, it became evident that there was a much bigger picture than any of us could ever have imagined. Honest folks get conned every day by expensive marketing campaigns. If advocates of globalization used plain English, we would know they were selling us a nightmare and we wouldn't buy it. They have been very successful in making community government seem like such a walk in the park. Community development sounds nice to most people. People who want to believe they are part of something good say that building community sounds good to them. That's why they will continue to pay for communitarian educations, trust the communitarian news media, and worst of all, support communitarian wars. We have trusted our governments and the big companies running everything for too long now. Because of that trust, the entire planet has evolved into a hellish utopia for us and a global carpetbagger's paradise for them. The children of today have been literally born into financial and spiritual servitude. Amitai Etzioni and those like him act as priests and priestesses of the global order. They lead us through a labyrinth of bureaucracy and mystical word games, every argument taking us deeper into the maze. They use the Hegelian dialectic to manipulate our opinions and create never-ending divisions among people. For us, it means we need to keep our focus on the fundamental absurdity of this system. We cannot be distracted by engineered social conflicts any longer. If we continue to wear labels imposed on us by society and waste our time fighting each other, they win by default with devastating results. The motivation for this research comes from love and respect for our fellow man and woman. We are not trying to incite violence or hate. We are also not trying to overthrow any government. We're still under the impression that we common people are the only legitimate government in the United States. What you do with the knowledge gained from these pages is out of our hands. We cannot imagine how you'll react to any of this. We do implore the reader to make use of their reasonable faculties, control any rage they might feel, and use legal methods for restoring order. Violence can only lead us into their solution. We have never been racial supremacists or religious fundamentalists, and we are not happy that the people currently in power are. Our aim is to restore honour and legal rights to individuals. We want to help people get out of the communitarian dialectic. It's time to rely on our own healthy instincts for survival. 2020, Our Common Destiny, was written with hope for the future of all Earth's children. Niki F. Raapana and Nordica M. Friedrich. Then there is a page of acknowledgements, which I shall not read. Chapter 1, Communitarianism. And here is where, if you have friends that are in the illegal movement who, talk about the law and constitutions and, know how to read legalese, this is where I ask that you send them this video. I will provide a link to the PDF of this book in the comments later on, or in the heading. I'll just edit something and put it in, or maybe just make a separate post, because there's legalese in here, and I think it's very important that the people working constitutions and laws and the law of the sea and all of that stuff, that they become informed. There's some very good documentation in here. It's not for naught, it's not for nothing. I think with their help we might get somewhere. Being optimistic. Ever heard of communitarian law? Communitarian anything? Most people haven't. If you're one of the millions who've never heard of it, the first thing you need to understand about communitarianism is this: we're not supposed to know anything about it. Before 2000, I had never heard of communitarianism. I saw that my law had changed, but for a very long time I could not understand how or why. I finally discovered communitarian law by searching the definitions of terms used by the Seattle government agencies. Keep in mind, not one American public official's response ever described their laws as communitarian. They only assured me that I couldn't grasp their purpose for the new laws, which they all explained as necessary to further the common good. They would not come right out and say that their lofty purpose was to create a more fair and equal distribution of the world's wealth. This could be the hardest chapter in this book to read. For most readers, there will be many unfamiliar terms. You may decide this hurts your brain too much. Please understand that is exactly how they want you to feel. Their whole convoluted theory is designed to discourage us from thinking we are capable of understanding it, but we are capable. Communitarianism is called by many different names that soften its core meaning. No matter what term it is cloaked behind, the idea is always considered the perfect political middle and boasts a strong academic following, which I've verified. So yeah, take my word for it, but you can just try verifying it yourself too. Communitarian thinking. Communitarian thinking can only be vaguely defined because it changes depending on the education level of the student. The Communitarian Network explains in their platform the need for a balance between rights and responsibilities. They suggest laws and programs that will help us to shore up our moral, social and political environment. We've got environmental social governance coming in. Well, it's actually here already. Global thinkers, and in parenthesis, Trilateral Commission, Institute for Communitarian Policy Research, Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderberg Group, and Project for a New American Century, close parenthesis, claim to have a better idea of what is of value and what constitutes morality. Key to their way of thinking is that all moral changes to the law should be made at the newly established community level and never through the proper legal channels for amending state and federal constitutions. A Bush aide, Robert D. Putnam of Harvard University, explained the idea for the Washington Post in 2001. Communitarianism or civil society thinking, the two have similar meanings, has many interpretations, but at its center is a notion that years of celebrating individual freedom have weakened the bonds of community, and that the rights of the individual must be balanced against the interests of society as a whole. Inherent in the philosophy is a return to values and morality which the school of thought believes can best be fostered by community organizations. We need to connect with one another. We've got to move a little more in the direction of community, in the balance between community and individual. I'll pause here and, make a note of there isn't a document you'll ever read that's planning, white paper, whether it comes from the Big Four or from government or council, federal, state, or large corporations, their mission statements. The word community is never missing, and the word that you'll never see is individual. Communitarian law. This book begins with an explanation of communitarian law because without it, nothing else in 2020 will make sense. The term community implies an obligation to promote the common good. Communitarian law is the basis for all free trade agreements, which one would think is very capitalist. However, it's communitarianism. So communitarian law is the basis for all free trade agreements, but that hasn't made it to the news that matters yet. In the United States, there is a total information blackout about the emerging communitarian strategies for global governance. Our elected officials deny the emerging North American Union and terms like trade corridors and trade agreements, community and or sustainable development, neighborhood plans, protected habitats, conservation easements, scenic byways, and smart growth hide the new judicial order from the American public. Schools in the United States usually call it international law and leave it at that. The philosophy is considered benign and very utopian, i.e. unrealistic, and the law is simply not taught at lower levels. Only the elites of academia and the political sphere are in the loop, and much of the existing communitarian case law is on record at the Court of Justice in Luxembourg in French. Communitarian law is an organic transformation. Here is how it was explained by Italian Prime Minister Giuliano Amato, later Vice President of the European Union Constitutional Convention, in an interview with Barbara Spinelli of La Stampa on July 13th, 2000. One must act as if, in Europe, as if one wanted only very few things in order to obtain a great deal. As if nations were to remain sovereign in order to convince them to surrender their sovereignty. The Commission in Brussels, for example, must act as if it were a technical organism in order to operate like a government, and so on, camouflaging and toning down. The sovereignty lost at a national level does not pass to any new subject. It is entrusted to a faceless entity, NATO, the UN, and eventually the EU, European Union, which used to be called the European Community. The Union is the vanguard of this changing world. It indicates a future of princes without sovereignty. The new entity is faceless, and those who are in command can neither be pinned down nor elected. That is the way Europe was made too, by creating communitarian organisms without giving the organisms presided over by national governments the impression that they were being subjected to a higher power. That is how the Court of Justice as a supranational organ was born, above governments. It was a sort of unseen atom bomb, which Schuman and Monet slipped into the negotiations on coal and steel community. That was what the CSC itself was, a random mixture of national egotisms which became communitarian. Just my own personal note here on coal and steel community, which is, heavy industry when this was happening, reminded me of Ayn Rand's books, Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. And, if anyone has any thoughts about that, let me know. I don't think it is a good idea to replace this slow and effective method, which keeps national states free from anxiety while they are being stripped of power, with great institutional leaps. Therefore, I prefer to go slowly, to crumble pieces of sovereignty up little by little, avoiding brusque transitions from national to federal power. That is the way I think we will have to build Europe's common policies. Communitarian philosophy and law is always written in the language of legal scholars and taught at the highest academic levels in elite schools and seminars, and the terms change. Tempering the language and inventing new terms is essential to creating an elite science. The goal is to keep people in the dark so that community planners and change agents can establish themselves in places where they would otherwise be run out of town. The last thing the planners want is to face a room full of locals who can call a spade a spade. They're unprepared for people who can easily challenge the theory behind their plans. Communitarian law is also called, and now I'm going to butcher a few of these because they are not in English, acquis communautaire, which is how you'll find it in Wikipedia, spelt ACQUISCOMMUNAUTAIRE. So acquis communautaire is French or Latin for acquired by the community. And we are not talking about the commoners now. The community is the industry, is the industrialists, is those who hoard and appropriate the resources to themselves. And because all of our governments are bankrupt, they call the shots. The person, those who have the money always call the shots. You live under your dad's roof and he's like, it's my roof and you'll do as I say, right? Okay. So the communitarian law is also called acquis communautaire. Codes de redaction interinstitutional. Community acquis, community law, divided sovereignty, le système judiciaire, something like that, l'ordre juridique communautaire, Marco Polo G, so Marco Polo GIE, and Sistema de Justicia Comunitaria. Very few American lawyers are familiar with the above terms. Frequent use of them is restricted to governments integrating into the European Union and their attorneys. Like, that's who knows about communitarianism. And that's why we always get that blank look from anyone if we ever dare mention it. Global to local communitarian law. Everyone knows this global to local, right? Everything's going through the councils. Even though they are unconstitutional. Yes, councils are unconstitutional in Australia, at least they are. We've had, I'm not sure, 2 or 3 referendums, and the people have said, no, we don't want a third tier of government. And yet there they are, and there they are calling the shots. And how are they doing this? Well, if you can continue to listen, you may find out. Global to local communitarian law. There are 3 main levels of global to local law. At the top are international courts and appointed councils. The middle level consists of regional trade unions, parliaments and councils. The bottom levels are the minor bureaucrats running local operations, using facilitators to achieve consensus within small councils. Now, don't forget, this was written in 2006, and since then we have, been posting for about 5-6 years and pointing exactly to these organisations and what they're called. International communitarian law is the law that balances individual and national rights against the emerging rights of the global community. International documents like the Earth Charter are founded on human rights, a communitarian concept which, on the surface, sounds very honourable and just. It's what's not included in the new law that's of primary significance. The international courts do not respect individual natural rights, as it is defined by numerous national declarations of independence and constitutions, including the Americans. Human rights, unlike individual rights, do not come from the creator of humankind, but from men who are smarter than that. This new system of law does not allow for any sovereignty, neither individual or national. In a communitarian world, even national presidents and monarchs are lowly subjects before their courts. The first communitarian pilot test was against the unpopular Chilean president Pinochet. Before I go to that, I just want to mention that the Charter of Human Rights is a corporate contract. It's not something that people have voted upon. It has been written by a corporation that has not been elected. And it is, it's just basically a business contract. And moreover, I've, made many a post signalling that it's a fluid document, meaning, or living document, which means that it changes, it evolves without your input. Kind of like, an app on your phone gets updated, upgraded, and, you don't have any input. All you have to do is nothing. By default, it rolls in, or you need to opt out if you can, and if you're aware of it. Well, that's how human rights is. And human rights is basically the new constitution without knowing it. It is placed above national constitutions. And you didn't vote for it. You didn't elect the people that wrote it. And you have no say when it changes to not suit you. So maybe today it suits you, tomorrow, who knows. There was something else, but anyway. And it's not just, individual rights, it's, national rights too. So we're all in this together. in a communitarian world, yes, okay. So the Chilean president, so they did it, okay. The first communitarian pilot test was against the unpopular Chilean president, Pinochet. So they're saying to you, like, even this individual, a president, is not above communitarian law. The arrest of Pinochet, so I'm quoting, right? The arrest of Pinochet signals that a more communitarian view of international law is taking form. The idealist school of international law derived from Immanuel Kant appears to be gaining upon the realist school of thought. Now, I read my friend Sunny sent me a Substack by, I think it's Christine Jones. Oh God, I hope I didn't get that wrong. And that explains sort of like the deeper theory of, what's humanism, what's, what's this difference between divine rights and these humanism and stuff. Where does it come from? Why is it important? What does morality mean? And has it changed? Why are we allowing ourselves for, why are we going along and accepting other men making the rules? And so this Immanuel, where here it says the idealist school of international law derived from Immanuel Kant appears to be gaining upon the realist school of thought. Now the realist school of thought is, from what I researched, what I found was Aristotelian realism, which was, like ontology is the study of existence, so, philosophers wondered, like, what are we? Like, what's our essence? And where do we come from? Those would be questions for ontological study. And so Aristotle arrived at a realism, like this is how we describe what's real, or how we observe what's real, and we come from something divine. And that has kind of always been the basis for law in Western culture anyway. Whereas from my little reading, Immanuel Kant, saying here that it's gaining ground, his school of thought is very much like a relative school of thought, as in, well, humans construct meaning that we make up, we make meaning, we define our essence, we define where we come from or where we're going or whatever. And so he's saying here that I'll reread it. The arrest of Pinochet signals that a more communitarian view of international law is taking form. The idealist school of international law, derived from Immanuel Kant, appears to be gaining upon the realist school of thought. So we're pushing away divine rights, we're pushing away a creator, and we're bringing to the center stage man. Okay. The communitarian view sees international law as working towards certain world goals that incorporate and transcend each state's own interests. Transcend the interests. This is so this is a bit of legal jargon that I was told what it meant and I've already forgotten. This is a sui generis order of international law. It establishes a system with multiple levels of sovereignty. It makes more complex the view of international relations espoused by Thomas Hobbes under the state is the ultimate conveyor under the state as the ultimate conveyor of sovereignty. And that excerpt is taken from What Does Pinochet Mean for International Law? From the HTTP Cyber Law, Harvard Education, blah, blah. Okay. So, in sum, it is saying that, that the state that he presided over was not the ultimate, conveyor of sovereignty. It is something above the state. outside of the state, above the national level. In international legal documents and case law, communitarian law ensures that regulatory standards are neither too individualist nor too collectivist. According to US legal advisors in the White House, communitarianism is the middle ground between too many national laws that protect individuals, as in the USA, and the lack of any national laws that protect individuals, as in China. European communitarian law. The favoured standard for regional communitarian law is in the European Union. Communitarian law was the basis and the reason for the failed European Constitution. Keep this Constitution in mind because it keeps coming up, and then there are some very, very interesting quotes. Regional communitarian law regulates trade and commerce between member nations of trade organisations such as the European Union and the World Trade Organization. That's no small thing there. In local communities, communitarian law protects the players involved in new private-public partnerships that do or plan to control all local natural resources, and that has come to pass since Niki wrote this. Quoting, "Because of ambitions to change human beings, communitarianism is a form of elitism. Its advocates have the feeling that they have been chosen to advise, to moralize, to know better than the normal people what is right or wrong, what the people should do, what will be good for them. They want us not only to be free, but to be good, just, moral as well. Of course, in their definition of what is good, just and moral." This was said by Klaus Václav, who was the second president of the Czech Republic Society and the Crisis, taken from the Society and the Crisis of Liberalism. Tied directly to rebuilding community and economic land development, communitarian law has indirectly been introduced into every trading nation, regardless of their legitimate political system. The European Union is a communitarian trade union. Membership has requirements. Professor Jan Mazak, PhD, President of the Constitutional Court of the Slovak Republic. So maybe you don't think much of the Slovak Republic, but a president of a constitutional court is kind of pretty high up, and you should take notice. Explains the obligations in his general remarks on a national judiciary after the accession of the Slovak Republic to the European Union. So upon joining the European Union, these were the remarks. The primary rule is that the national courts of member states are obliged to apply directly those communitarian standards which fulfill the communitarian conditions of the immediate applicability. And here the editors write, complete remarks are reproduced at the back of this book. Now, because the remarks are too long, I'm only going to read just the bit that should have your eyes popping out of your head. Did I underline it? Oh, tell me I underlined it. Give me a second. Because he says it like kind of like really clearly, like even though it's all very jargony, there is a point where he says it very clearly. Oh, fuck. Why didn't I highlight it? Pursuant to Article 7, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution, the Slovak Republic may, by an international treaty, which was ratified and promulgated in the way laid down by a law, or on the basis of such treaty, transfer the exercise of a part of its power to the European communities and the European Union. legally binding acts of the European communities and of the European Union shall have precedence over laws of the Slovak Republic. The takeover of legally binding acts demanding the implementation will be realized through the law or government regulation pursuant to Article 120, Paragraph 2. To some basic principles of procedures of national courts after joining the European Union during negotiations and discussions on court agenda. It's repeated many a time. It basically says it's above their own constitution. And that would basically mean that all member states of the European Union have the same communitarian laws to be part of the European Union, to be part of that trading bloc, to get money from the EU, whatever. Because don't forget, like, this whole EU concept of this one money, one currency, one rule, one government to oversee all of them, all of the countries, that is, has basically been a blueprint for the entire world. The one currency and one rule and one government, and they make all the decisions and they override constitutions. And how do they do that? Because the governments are going, okay, we will make the trade-offs. We want EU money. We want trade. We want to be part of trade agreements. And therefore we will forfeit our own laws, and we're going to do it really quietly, and people just aren't going to really notice, and everyone's going to call it community and international law, and it's good for everyone and for the greater good. And this is what has happened. And this, that's the thing about this, as obscure as it may sound, as difficult as it may be to grasp, the truth is out there for you to see at every turn. People were forced, coerced into taking vaccines for the community. They were forced to wear masks for the community. They had to close their businesses for the community. That's called balancing the individual rights against the community. And now that kind of all sounds good until you try to define fucking community, and you come up with, who's good? Who is it good for besides, Bezos at Amazon and Zuckerberg's and whoever owns the pharmaceutical companies and all the, boards of directors, and the people hoarded a whole lot more of it. More power, more money, more, and everybody else lost out. All of a sudden I get the slow connection in this 5G shit. Anyway, so it's not about just going, oh yeah, community sounds good, and we want it for the greater good, and if one person has to suffer, if one person has to burn themselves to heat up 100 other people, well, maybe we should do that. The thing is, in reality, to me, and to, I think, anybody with eyes to see will see that the millions and the billions are suffering. For whom? Which community? Sorry, I'll get back to it. Communitarian law requires every nation to completely change their local and national political structures to coexist under the new laws. All prior legal contracts are balanced away. Any individual liberties claimed by dissenting citizens are null and void. There will be no more written constitutions. The laws will always be in constant flux. Fluid, living documents. All member nations must agree to comply with a new system of law that changes quickly and is so supremely complex that hardly anyone can claim to understand it. The legal framework originated inside trade agreements and treaties. I don't know about other places of the world, but in Australia, we keep hearing about treaties the last few years. Foremostly that Indigenous peoples treaties. And wait till you hear the quote about treaties and constitutions. The legal framework originated inside trade agreements and treaties. It's always done through commerce. It's always done with money, okay? It's not like people vote for it like, you know, on some morally based thing. It's always like, you want to trade, you want to make money. Well, if you want to do that, you want to be part of the economy, you'll be vaccinated. And this is the same way it goes. You want to be part of the trading, you're going to be communitarian. And at whatever cost and expense comes with that. What began as a clause in these trade agreements and treaties slipped into negotiations by Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman is now a major field of study named after them. I haven't done my homework. I haven't, you know, looked up Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman to find out what this major field of study is that's been named after them. But I'm sure it's going to be enlightening when I get to it. The European Court of Justice, for short ECJ, is often called the Communitarian Court. The ECJ's court records include communitarian environmental decisions since 1957. All regional courts and World Trade Organization hearings and reviews follow this model for standards and norms. We would have heard about the standards and norms coming out of the ICCC and the IEEE and whatever, you know, all these technological aspects of the fourth industrial revolution and how we need to have interoperability between computers and, you know, 5G connections and the ITC world, and you know, because if we're going to have one government and one rule of law and one economy, basically, well, and it all needs to be centralized, you need interoperability, and we need standards and norms, you know, across the board. Communitarian agreements protect global corporate, listen to this, you know, like who would think this? Communitarian agreements protect global corporations and exporting nations from small fry competitors. Because everybody thinks community and they think, oh, my local community, the guy down the street selling eggs. No, that's not what communitarianism is. You have just been led to believe that so that you go along with this. And that's why all the small fry is being put out of business. Because, you know, we always need to look to reality to, you know, understand, not to understand, but to affirm and validate what we're reading. You know, are we reading something that's fantasy, or are we reading something that merges, that, you know, holds up in reality? And it's holding up in reality. Every word here holds up in reality. In global disputes, communitarian law favors corporate interests over local property or business owners. Individuals can no longer stand behind national laws that protect their right to control their own property. Quoting, the European Commission points out that there is a considerable body of communitarian environmental law and that member states are obliged to provide for effective, dissuasive and proportionate sanctions. We've got managed retreat. So there's a lot of work from Kate Mason and from Julian Romanello and a bunch of writers around their work, and other profiles, bigger profiles, smaller profiles. A lot of people are speaking to the issue of how balancing, you know, individual rights against the environment, the whole ecology as a whole. You know, we end up with, you know, 30 by 30, which is, you know, 30% of land by 2030 will be out of bounds to the public. you know, and it will be 50 by 50. So 50% of land will be out of bounds to the public by 2050. That doesn't mean the corporations. That just means you and I. And that's why in Australia we can't visit a whole bunch of mountains anymore. We can't go hiking. We can't even take pictures of rocks because, you know, treaties and, you know, indigenous and sacredness and all this other stuff. This is where it stems from. They're saying that, well, you know, the earth and Gaia and, you know, blah, blah treaties is more important than what you're going to lose individual. But what's really happening? What's really happening? Every new law that balances individual rights against the rights of the community is communitarian. This includes all of the nice sounding ideas to protect our safety, security, health and ecosystems. European communitarian law was also the model legislation used for the Central American Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA. Not sure if people were, you know, conspiracy theorists back when that was all very heavily spoken about on, you know, the interwebs, and what a disaster it was, like, you know, how free trade agreement was the inverse of free trade. CAFTA officially puts US constitutional law under the primacy of community law. So what one would think as being, you know, some incredibly, you know, awful capitalist innovation is actually communitarian. Effectively rendering the Constitution and the Bill of Rights impotent in the hands of law-abiding Americans. I'll repeat that sentence because I think it's important. And all of a sudden I have a slow connection. I mean, really, you know, all this progress, all this 5G. I've got, you know, exceptional 5G stuff here, you know, hardwired to this house. And I hope it plays anyway. Of course, I cannot see a single comment. Perhaps I'll be able to see comments later if you've left them, but so far I do not have any comments. CAFTA officially puts US constitutional law under the primacy of community law, effectively rendering the Constitution and the Bill of Rights impotent in the hands of law-abiding Americans. So I know there are people out there who will argue that, okay, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are, you know, not good enough. But even that is no longer. It has been superseded. The US Congress adopted CAFTA in 2005 and placed the American people squarely in a communitarian legal arrangement. This fact was never made public and never will be. Our integration has been kept very hush-hush. Our reforms are buried in purchase and trade agreements, plans, national and state legislation, initiatives, executive orders, regulations, codes, and local ordinances. You know, you bury this stuff under all of this, and how are you ever going to work it out? How's anyone ever going to go, oh, look, you know, things, I can't build something, I can't build a shed that's more than 10 square meters in my backyard because communitarians. You'll never find it. Well, unless you spend years digging and asking the right questions and just having that much tenacity that you just don't give up. Quoting, the correct application of the communitarian law produced by an international integration organisation implies that state members have to make political and legal internal reforms. This is from Florida Atlantic University, EU-CAFTA Law Symposium, sponsored by the Jean Monnet Chair at the University of Miami on the 4th of November 2005, 20 years ago. Once a nation agrees to comply with integration, it must also adapt its courts to rule in favour of the almighty community. The law also requires new agencies to enforce the new laws. Members of CAFTA can now use community law to overrule American law. Acknowledgement of basic principles, I'm quoting again. Acknowledgement of basic principles such as the direct applicability of community law, in brackets, judgment of 5th of February 1963 in the Van Gent and Loos case 26/62. Okay, I'll reread it without the where it came from. Acknowledgement of basic principles such as the direct applicability of community law and the primacy of community law over national law has constituted its most significant contribution to European integration. On the basis of these principles, individuals may invoke community law before national courts and seek the non-application of any national law which is contrary to community law. This was said by José Murtad de Wilmas, La jurisprudence de la Cour de justice comme instrument de l'intégration communautaire. That's a mouthful. So what he's saying is that should you not like a national law, all you need to do is go to court, any court in your land, and invoke communitarian law that would oppose it and go, so therefore I win, because that's a trump card, it's an ace card in any land basically and in any court. Recent academic discussions over CAFTA have included the need to export European community law into a more developed Middle Eastern region. The law redesigns everything, especially religion. The communitarians are in the design business. They are redesigning the world. Quoting, "The First Amendment's disestablishment clause is not a foreign policy tool, but a peculiarly American conception. Just because the American government is banned from promoting religion within the United States does not mean that the State Department and the Pentagon cannot promote religion overseas in societies that are undergoing profound societal changes. This last point is crucial. Overseas, we are participating as a key architect and builder of new institutions. We are, in what social scientists call, in the design business. This is quite distinct from what we do at home, shoring up a solid social structure designed 2 centuries ago, careful not to rock the foundations or undermine the pillars on which it stands. In Iraq, Afghanistan, and many other third world countries, the editors have added a SIC because Iraq, Afghanistan were not third world countries. We participate in the groundbreaking foundation-laying stage, one in which elements we take for granted at home, such as a thriving religious life within civil society, must be provided." And that's what Amitai Etzioni, that's him being quoted. So communitarianism isn't just law, it's not just business, it's not just economics. Amitai has not just recognised but put forth very forcefully that human beings are more than just, animals that need to eat and trade and have a roof over their heads, that our spirituality and meaning in life are very large components of existence. And thus religion has not been left out. Spirituality has not been left out. Morality has not been left out. Meaning has not been left out. It is always woven into the propaganda and the policies. National resistance to communitarian integration. Prior to regionalisation, what's the time? Oh, have I been going like an hour? Is it time to get off? How much more can I read? I should just go right through to the first chapter, and whoever feels like watching will watch and pause and play it back whenever they feel like it, if they feel like it. National resistance to communitarian integration. Prior to regionalisation under CAFTA, community law was introduced into the United States of America primarily under community development. See Kello versus New London. Kello spelled K-E-L-O. Sustainable development and rebuilding community remain the favoured structures for implementing the communitarian system in the US. 2020 visionings have already taken place by local stakeholder councils across the states. We began quietly moving into the communitarian direction over a decade ago, with hardly a murmur of dissent. Still, not everyone is going meekly along with integration. Communitarians know that educated, religious and advanced and industrial nations do not give up their freedom and economic independence easily. Reluctant, backward nations like Afghanistan, Palestine, Iraq, Iran, Lebanon and Syria must be bombed out of existence before peaceful rebuilding of the world can take place. All over the Middle East, genuinely peaceful Muslim, Jewish and Christian neighbours have been torn apart by the rhetoric used to foster globalist invasions. Besides the adamant rejection of global hegemony in Muslim countries and others with strongly religious governments, there is also a growing movement of European nationals who refuse to live under the yoke of community law. Overworked America is too busy suffering from a constant barrage of propaganda to notice there is even a yoke. Remember Italian Prime Minister Giuliano Amato and the act as if method back on page 16? One reason for keeping quiet about the act as if method is the rejection of the European Constitution by European voters. Quoting, "There are some tendencies within the European Union that can be seen with critical eyes," he said, "notably an extension of communitarian law by the European Court." Quoting James Cantor from Austria, New Thoughts on the EU, International Herald Tribune, January 1st, 2006. How many American voters see the extension of communitarian law with critical eyes? Unlike the French and the Dutch people, we were never asked to vote on integration under communitarianism. Americans are simply being miseducated and persuaded to adopt it without having an opinion in the matter. Quoting, "We are united, however, in our conviction that a communitarian perspective must be brought to bear on the great moral, legal and social issues of our time. Moral voices achieve their effect mainly through education and persuasion." This comes from the Communitarian Network platform. Listen to this. In 2007, European leaders signed a new treaty at Lisbon. The Lisbon Treaty established everything the French and Dutch voters rejected via the referendum process. How many times has this happened in recent history? What does Giuliano Amato, the act as if guy, what does he say? And it's a speech, by the way, at the London School of Economics on the 21st of February 2007. He says, "The good thing about not calling it a constitution is that no one can ask for a referendum on it. So if you call it a treaty and you don't try to amend a constitution or write a new constitution, then no one can ask for a referendum on it to overturn it." So what he's saying here, and what I've looked into, what is the definition of treaty? I've actually made a couple of posts about that. That these are legal instruments that are so high up, but because treaty sounds like, all right, and you know, it doesn't sound like it's in contest with a constitution, we kind of shrug our shoulders and go, oh, it's a treaty. It's like, sounds nice. It almost sounds like a treat. But we're talking about wiping out constitutions now. And nobody should be surprised that, you know, Giuliano Amato was, you know, at the London School of Economics, which is, you know, the Fabian den of wolves, all dressed in sheep's clothing, right? Soft communitarian law. There are thousands of community-based legal programs designed to prevent violence, blight, ugly homes, crime, accidental death, domestic disputes, ignorance, alcoholism, drug addiction, obesity, mental illness, hoarding syndrome, junk storage, noise, unlicensed commerce, disease, plagues, greed, envy, terror, and poverty. Community-based legal programs. These are funded by massive grants and kept going by convincing people that we need to reduce the potential for crime and fear. Many of these laws start out as voluntary programs designed to protect the health and safety of the community. But what starts off as voluntary soon becomes like coercive, and then all of a sudden it's law, and we don't even know how we got there. Incremental steps. The National ID and the National Animal Identification System, NAIS, both began as voluntary programs that will soon, like the American Community Survey, become a crime to refuse. I'm pretty sure that's how it is in Australia, that all animals need to be chipped. Known as soft communitarian law, this sort of legislation requires people to make themselves less of a burden on the community. Identifying troublemakers reduces their potential for crime and homeland terrorism. And that's identifying troublemakers in advance. Potential for crime, almost committing a crime, must not be confused with a criminal offence, which in the United States requires proof of damages for a conviction. Prevention crimes don't have to prove damages. The court only has to prove the potential for damages. A true communitarian prosecutor uses coulds, shoulds, and what ifs. In the communitarian legal system, due process is eliminated. All new decrees are final. They rule against selfish nations and individuals. They go so far as to blame global famine, mad cow disease, gluttony, poverty, and civil wars on nations of private property owners. If you live or lived in a country of private property owners, now you understand why there is a war against you. In order to end nasty things like war and hunger, all private property must come under the direction of community governmental organizations. So here I'll just mention something. You know, some countries are known as, you know, rich countries, and others, you know, not so rich countries, even in the West, you know, Greece being one of those countries that's not considered a rich country, but it's definitely, you know, post-industrial and whatever, but it's not a rich country. But what was it? It was a nation of private property owners. Actually, like the rate of private property ownership was huge by comparison to Australia. Fewer people, people there owned their properties. They weren't owned by the banks. Prior to the 2008 global financial crisis, at which point people were cursing at inheriting properties from their deceased parents because they couldn't afford to keep them, because the taxes and levies and land taxes and all that stuff was so high. It was a burden to receive a property. Now, that doesn't make any sense unless you understand that they needed to shift all this private property out of hands and into the community. So it's not just rich countries, it's any country that has private property ownership that will see like the worst of it. In order to end nasty things like war and hunger, all private property must come under the direction of community governmental organizations. And this is how they frame it. You know, like if you've all got nothing, well then, you know, if your neighbor doesn't have more than you, then there's no reason to fight him. You know, equality in misery, equality in poverty, you know, will remove reason for conflict and friction and whatever. There's a lot to be said on that. American communitarian theory. Because it won't actually be like that in practice. We'll be fighting over battery power and water drops. Because there's always going to be a need to be fighting for something and competing for something. Otherwise, there'll be no meaning to existence. There'll be no reason for you to try if they're just going to give you everything. Like, you know, give you a bed and give you your UBI and your food and all the rest of it. Well, and we're all exactly the same. Well, that's not going to work. American community, sorry about interjecting all the time, I can't help myself. American communitarian theory. Global communitarians began preaching in the USA in the early 1990s. Their solution to all our woes was to balance our selfish individualism and dangerous, outdated ideas of nationalism against their enlightened definition of the collective good. Dr. Amitai Etzioni is the founder of the Communitarian Network. A professor of sociology, he also founded the Institute for Communitarian Policy Studies at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He is a German who was born Werner Volk and emigrated to Israel. He is a powerful mystic who says Americans can't cope with their inevitable transformation to globalism and that we need his help. He has more moral communitarian advice on anything and everything that has to do with our people, our life, and our society, but we're not allowed to discuss his. Here is how he explains the world's need for a new form of global governance. The world needs a new global architecture, additional layers of governance to deal with the issues that neither nations nor traditional forms of intergovernmental organizations can cope with. That's Amitai Etzioni speaking at The Hague for the 2004 conference, Europe, a Beautiful Idea. Etzioni is a hodgepodge of globalist ideology. A follower of David Ben-Gurion, he was trained in a communist kibbutz in the 30s as a teenage terrorist. In brackets, it says here the Zionist revolution was in 1947. He led a brigade of troops aided by Soviet units in the Israeli war against 7 Arab nations in 1948 and a religious political student in the early 50s. He is a Fabian expert in Hegelian logic. The Fabian Society is an elite British socialist organisation committed to sneaking global government policies into national institutions. Etzioni connects communitarian thinking to ancient Greece, Hebrew Judaic Christian theology, and his teacher, Martin Buber, who was a modern follower of Hegel. Quoting, "Communitarian thinking is not an American import. Its roots sprout from ancient Greece and the Old and New Testaments. I was trained by Martin Buber in Jerusalem. While each society must evolve its own communitarian answers, the challenges are similar. Man and woman do not live by bread alone. It is unwise to believe that all we need is economic rehabilitation. We require our daily acts to be placed into a context of transcendent meaning and their moral import made clear." That's Amitai Etzioni speaking in Nation in Need of Community Values for the London Times of February 20th, 1995. So Amitai is like, he's a trifecta, right? The guy's got it all. So the German Zionist, Israeli, terrorist, Fabian, guru, spiritual, and he wants to mix up the Old Testament, the New Testament. every religion, ancient Greece. He's actually, in his newer works that I've read, he goes into the Eastern philosophies as well, and he just like stirs them all together and goes, here's my concoction. You know, it doesn't matter what you believe in communitarianism, because I tied everything to communitarianism. I'm giving you meaning for life. I'm giving you a new social economic order, and I'm dressing it up in all of our theology, all of our philosophies, you know, from the time we came, you know, we climbed down from the trees. The guy's a real number. He's dead now. He died a year or two, I think about 2 years ago he died. But that doesn't mean his work isn't going to be picked up and carried on. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was a German philosopher who expanded a brilliant form of logic called dialectical reasoning. The Hegelian dialectic is a setup for millions of continual conflicts between a thesis and antithesis, leading to a perfect synthesis, communitarianism. A thesis in Greek is a position. An antithesis is the opposite position. A synthesis is a coming together of those two. Etzioni uses the dialectic to lead us into balanced communitarian solutions, which, according to his theory, is the most perfect system ever created. Since our anti-communitarian manifesto is the antithesis to his perfect synthesis, it could mean it's not so perfect after all. Not only has Etzioni been advising US presidents since 1979, he is so influential, he has managed to incorporate dialectical communitarianism into the founding principles for the United States of America. Hailed as a guru, he's often called the everything expert, and he is the leading scholar in the movement to rewrite US history to include communitarian influence on all principled authors of American freedom. Some historians have depicted the United States as a society centered around Lockean values, those of rights and liberty. Actually, it is now widely agreed that the United States had, from its inception, both strong communitarian and individualistic strand, a synthesis of Republican virtues and liberal values. And that's quoting Amitai Etzioni, The Emerging Global Normative Synthesis, Journal of Political Philosophy, Volume 12, Number 2, 2004, pages 214 to 244. So he's rewriting history, okay? So he's interpreting, he's editorializing, a new way of interpreting the history of the ethics, the morality, the founding principles of the US. He's insisting that it's communitarian. Like, it's all good, it's not changing. It was always communitarian. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, communitarianism arose spontaneously out of upper academia in the late 1970s. We disagree, says Niki and Nordica. We have traced it back to imperialist merchants who lost America for a second time in the War of 1812. Our theory, that's just, qualified here as our theory, is that Hegel designed his dialectic to help overcome the reasonable colonists' objections to tyranny and despotism. Building a communitarian America. I'm going to finish chapter 1, which is about law, and I will leave it at that, but I'm going to keep going until that's done. Building a communitarian, I believe this book has to be on record somewhere, somehow, because just not enough people are going to read it, and maybe a few more will listen. Communitarianism is promoted Communitarianism is promoted as the end of history. I think that means as in, history is, a tale of wars and problems and conflicts. I think that's really what it means. So, communitarian is just going to fix everything. and, you know, we'll just have no reason to have history anymore. That we'll have nothing to learn from it because everything will be perfect. Talk about being presumptuous, right? Many Marxists, oh, they're my favorites lately. My favorite pet hates. And just, you know, just single one out is Yanis Varoufakis in Greece. Just a special shout out to that bastard. Many Marxists will go to their graves believing it is perfect and the only way to create a truly livable world. Today, all our daily acts are being placed in the context of Amitai Etzioni's transcendent meaning of economic rehabilitation. Individualism is now defined as a moral sickness from which we must all be rehabilitated. In the United States, privately owned businesses, family farms, guns, personal opinions, and private lives, once the bastion of American freedom, have been balanced away in the name of social progress. The clear moral import of communitarian law is that individual freedom is intolerable to a healthy and sustainable community. In Etzioni's ideal world, children will be put to work serving their assigned eco-collectives, taken from the Universal National Service Act of 2006. Quoting, "Healthy communities are built upon two pillars of equal strength and necessity, a respect for the freedom of individuals and a commitment to the common good. In order for our society to continue and to flourish, all of its members must work towards this balance between rights and responsibility, including children." Including children. Amitai Etzioni from his blog, Educating for Freedom and Responsibility, March 2005. The US Constitution versus communitarian values. US law is based entirely in property rights. The only legitimate crimes in this country are actions that cause a measurable damage to somebody's person or property. A dead body must be produced before a charge of murder can be brought against the suspect, and the due process to be followed is clearly outlined in our law. Which courts have authority to grant a search warrant is also clearly outlined in the law, as well as presumption of innocence until guilt is proven. The burden of proof is on the state to prove exactly what was damaged, when, where, how, and by whom. Civil courts require proof of damages too. Complaints can only be filed in the US courts that state a financial loss of property. They must request a specific amount of money to recoup the loss. The court of jurisdiction changes based on the category of damages or the amount of money claimed. Communitarian values promote livability and quality of life, and regulate the smallest details of life. When Americans hear these terms, their eyes will glaze over. When we try to explain that these are deadly terms used to destroy freedom, they scoff. People assume that anything that sounds so stupid has to be harmless. The fact that quality of life prescribes a communitarian life means nothing to the Americans we know. They will comply with communitarian laws without ever questioning their legality. They already do, all the time. 1 out of every 130 adult state citizens has been arrested and charged with driving under the influence. The crime requires no actual damages against persons or physical property. The crime itself is the physiological condition of the potential criminal. It is based on what crimes other people have committed under the same conditions. A DUI, driving under the influence, is a crime for immoral behaviour. Courts require DUI offenders to pay for costly private religious and cult programs designed to modify and manipulate behaviour. Millions in grants have been poured into setting up faith-based interventions. Everybody buckles up now. It's the law, right? The cops make commercials about it. The crime for not buckling your seatbelt is putting yourself at risk for injury in the event of an accident. The same goes for helmet laws. The crime is maybe crashing into something and maybe cracking your head open and maybe contributing to the rising costs of healthcare insurance for the community. This is called crime prevention and is closely linked to health. The war on obesity is real. Anything risky is now illegal. Safe and affordable housing laws have spread like wildfire. We've created a whole new set of controls over private homes and rental properties. Homeowner associations require relinquishing property rights. Landlords are required to submit rent applications to community councils for approval. In Australia at the moment, I'm pretty sure you'll need a digital ID to become a renter. And that isn't because the landlord asked for it, but that's because, you know, the system needs to mediate who gets a house and where and whatnot. Legal constitutional search warrants are bypassed entirely because they are identified barriers to public health and safety. Less obvious are the multitudinous land use regulations. Here in Australia, it's crazy. Some are just unbelievably stupid. In Warland, Wyoming, they require hedges to be 5 feet or lower so cops can see inside every yard. Conservation easements. Anyone who's bought a house or has looked at, the plans of a house will note that they have easements that they can't build on. They can't, put a tomato plant there or whatever. Conservation easements pick away at the borders of private property along valuable streams and public trails. Even if it doesn't seem that valuable, it seems like, the council is, claiming their territory all the time. It's always more and more and more. Habitat and species restoration calls for confiscation of all private land and water. So when you can't use the water on your property in your own dam, in your own lake, in the creek that runs through your property, well, that's not yours, is it? When you can't cut a tree down, one that is threatening to, take out your toddlers that play in the yard, that's not really your tree. It's not really your land, is it? And that is where, the greater community needs that oxygen from your tree, or the species, the ecosystem of that tree are more important than the lives of your children. And I'm speaking to this because it was a recent article in an MSM paper. A man wanted to cut down a tree known as a widow maker because it always drops large branches and limbs. So he has a widow maker in his backyard. It's a type of eucalypt. And it's like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And he contacted the council because he has 2 toddlers that play in the yard, and it's going to cost him $10,000 to have the tree removed. 5,000 of which will be what's it called? It'll be tree offset. You know how you can buy carbon offset. So basically, because you are destroying one tree, then by paying 5,000 to some body, some entity, some corporate entity, what they'll do is that they'll go and plant one of these trees or enough trees to make up for what was lost in your yard. If anyone's got any idea of the scale of Australia, and if anyone's ever driven up the east coast of Australia to see the millions and trillions of widow makers that are overhanging over us, the highways, the roads, just forest deep, it's, I'm not being cynical, I'm being logical, and we're in serious trouble when we are at the point where we are charging $10,000 to potentially prevent children's deaths, while at the same time, claiming every life counts and grandma's life counts. And, it doesn't take an expert to see, branches that fall, and that bad timing could end up with a child's death or paralysis. I have a friend whose son is now paralysed. He's actually paraplegic because a couple of years ago, during high winds in Victoria, he just happened to be walking under a widowmaker. So he was a pedestrian. And so he went to hospital for months and months and months and months, and he still can't walk and cannot use his arms. He was only 20-something. Pardon the segue. Building permits must be pre-approved by corporate global developers to ensure compliance with vision. Noise ordinances establish new restrictions on lively or loud behaviours. Permits are now required for even small gatherings. Large parties require background checks for all hosts and hiring of licensed security professionals. Anyone travelling by air is subject to degrading invasive searches. ID must be adapted to meet communitarian standards. Hunting, fishing and gun laws change so fast and so often that nobody knows what they are now, sometimes not even the authorities enforcing them. Wilderness camping is now kept under strict observation. There are limits to your stay and you must check in before travelling into designated wilderness areas. This is true in Australia. They also recommend having a global positioning systems unit on you at all times for our safety, of course. We also must ask permission from their masters to ride off-road motor vehicles. Registration and licensing is required for every vehicle and junk cars are not allowed. Violators will be towed. The states are introducing countless new requirements for upgrading to a national driver's license. Many people already submit their hair, skin cells, saliva and urine to corporate agencies for laboratory analysis. All of our personal information is gathered into a giant database and sifted through by anonymous mapping specialists. Public school records, academic tests, aptitude evaluations, hospital and criminal records, and most importantly, anecdotal data, the opinions of our teachers, neighbours, peers, co-workers, family, friends, and enemies. Students across the country are required to perform mandatory community service, also known as service learning, in order to graduate. This forced volunteerism is an eerie mirror of the massive American prison industrial complex. Convicted criminals are irregularly sentenced to perform community service in addition to fines and time. American public schools have completed their transition to the communitarian system. The next generation of American children will believe the United States was conceived in communitarianism. The third way and global politics. We're coming to the end. Communitarianism is often referred to as the third way. In the United States, it is represented by the Democratic Leadership Council, DLC. Funded by the Rothschilds Bank of England, the New Democrats were created to further communitarian programs and laws introduced under Republican administrations. Because the third way is a bipartisan network of like-minded public servants, the 1990s phase was introduced by William J. Clinton. Clinton implemented many DLC programs during his term. His vice president, Al Gore, headed the National Partnership for Reinventing Government. Today, President Bush Jr. furthers every one of Clinton's and Gore's communitarian projects. Bush II has also added many of his own ideas for making America safer. The third way is the new sensible middle ground. This is why representatives from all parties support communitarian laws. As the White House pendulum swings back to the Democrats, the leading Democratic contenders for the nomination in 2008 are described in mainstream press as communitarians. No longer hidden, Obama's Stand for Change campaign is pure communitarian rhetoric. Hillary Clinton is a personal friend of Etzioni, and she mentions him in her book, It Takes a Village. The elections are a year away, so we're quoting here. there are going to be many twists and turns, but in the end, the American people will choose communitarian. Unless a third-party candidate siphons off many Democratic votes, the Supreme Court denies voting rights to many who are poor, less educated, and from a minority background, and hence have no government-issued photo ID. Americans are swayed by the thousands of troops coming home from Iraq. As Bush draws down the surge, the economy picks up and global climate cools down. That is, communitarians should not uncork the champagne just quite yet, but they can safely put a bottle or two into the fridge. At least many more people will learn a lot more about communitarian ideas. What more can we ask for? Amitai Etzioni notes, January 17th, 2008. Prime Minister Tony Blair is the UK's third way party boy. In San Francisco, it is Mother Earth friendly former communist Russian President Gorbachev. He created the science of socioeconomics with Etzioni. In Germany, it was Chancellor Schroeder. In Cuba, it's still Comrade Castro representing modern democratic freedom. In Iraq, it is America spreading a vision of global peace and justice. The war on terror merges all systems into a perfectly balanced mishmash of communism, imperialism, capitalism, and democracy. The new definition of freedom and democracy means violently exporting communitarian values. Means to achieving the goal can range all the way from seditious legislation to armed invasion. According to the World Trade Organization, communitarianism is even more democratic than democracy. Democratic communitarianism has snaked its way into every world power. It is the glue that binds our leaders together in a new UK, USA, EU, Soviet, Israeli, Asian alliance. The strongest and weakest nations alike must bow before their sublime new masters. Etzioni highly recommends, based on his expertise as a terrorist, communist, and amphibian, that the military strength of the United States be combined with the authority of the United Nations. The military strength of the United States, backed by Israel, combined with the authority of the United Nations. He says America has a moral obligation to rebuild a moral world with KGB/Israeli community military policing, but he doesn't always explain it's required to establish a communitarian new world order. The communitarians need the might of the American taxpayers' military budget to enforce all the new global laws. As any communitarian will explain, communitarian behavior laws are useless if they cannot be enforced. That was the first chapter. It's quite a slim book. It only has like 117 pages, and we have got through the first 30. So I hope you learned something. I hope you found that interesting. I look forward to seeing any comments, and I'll be back to read more after I get through the next part. Thank you very much for being in company and listening.